So that's kind of what we've been talking about over the last several weeks of the course of this Winning at Relationships series. It's kind of been, what does it look like? What would it look like for us to build the kinds of relationships where the bones are good? Where it just feels like it can withstand anything, no matter what comes our way. And man, it's just been an incredible series over the last couple of weeks. It's been so much fun hearing the things that your groups are talking about, the things that you've been talking about with your families, and just how God is ultimately kind of shaping the relationships that we have. And one of the kind of the foundational principles behind this is that we tend to treat relationships kind of like we do our cars, meaning we don't really pay attention to them unless they're broke. And then all of a sudden, when things start rattling, you're not checking the engine of your car every day, but when things start rattling in the car, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, we got to pay attention to this. The problem is if we treat relationships like that, by the time a relationship starts rattling, it might be too late. And then there's a lot of regret, and then there's a lot of forgiveness that has to be given. So we've just been asking, how do we get ahead of that? How do we proactively build into our relationships so that they have good bones, so that we can win at relationships? And the way that we've been doing that is we've been looking at this particular model that Dr. John Van Epp came up with. John's become a good friend of ours here at the church, and John leans in on decades of both clinical experience as a psychologist, but also as a pastor, and really just saying, man, these are principles that are true for every relationship. And kind of to review the model, let me just show you real quick. If you've been here, then you know this, but I just love it because it's so simple. And basically the model is this, is that every human relationship, it doesn't matter what relationship it is, has 5 key bonds that have to be developed. So this can be relationships with friends or roommates, relationships with coworkers, relationships with your dating relationships, or maybe with your family, with your children, parents, spouse, whatever. And these are the 5 core bonds that are true and that exist in every relationship. We have to know each other, learn to trust each other, rely on each other, commit to each other, and there's a healthy level of touch depending on the relationship. That these are the 5 core bonds that build strong relationships. And one of the principles that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks is that when you're first beginning to build a relationship with someone, so when you're first beginning to get to know someone, maybe that's a dating relationship or maybe it's just a new friendship or whatever, one of the principles is that any of these dials, because these tend to work like levers when you think about these bonds and relationships. In other words, they fluctuate. They can move up and down. We have control over these dials. And as you're beginning to get to know someone, one of the principles that's so important is that we've discovered is that no dial should get ahead or above to the dial on the left when you're beginning to get to know someone. In other words, if it's a new friendship or a new dating relationship or whatever that you're beginning to get to know, you should never trust them more than you know them. Can we all agree on that? You should never rely on them more than you have the ability to trust them. Same goes for commit, same goes for touch. So this is just one of the principles as you're getting to know someone. But once you're in a committed relationship, one of the principles we talked about is that these dials just always fluctuate. They're going up and down kind of all the time based on and determined upon circumstances. That's normal for that to happen. And so we've been exploring kind of what it looks like to build each of these bonds. And so week 1, we spend all of our time talking about this bond right here, this bond of knowing someone. And then week 2, we looked at trust and what that looks like. Last week, we looked at rely and our control over where we move this dial. If you haven't caught any of these messages, please go online and check these out because it's so helpful. And next week, we're going to talk about touch. So that should be a record attendance for men here at our church. So that's coming. And so today, this is the bond I want to talk about, commit. I want to talk about commitment today and how critically important this bond is in developing relationships. And to kind of get us kicked off on the same page together, I just want to give you a quick definition of what we're talking about when we talk about commitment in a relationship. This is kind of a simple definition. Commitment is the decision to dedicate, devote, or pledge yourself to a relationship. At the end of the day, commitment within the context of a relationship is this. It's the decision, so it's a choice. It's a decision, it's a choice to dedicate, devote, or pledge yourself to a relationship. Now, obviously, this has all varying degrees depending on the relationship. Your decision to dedicate, devote, and pledge yourself to a coworker looks very different than to your spouse. The decision to dedicate and devote yourself to your child looks very, very different than, to your neighbor. So this has all sorts of different degrees, but this is ultimately what's behind the bond of commitment. And here's why the bond of commitment is so critically important. Man, you got to hear this. This is almost like if you don't hear anything else today, just hear this one. Here's why it's so important, why we got to talk about it. Because commitment is the bond that will pull a relationship through when all other bonds are depleted. Commitment's the bond that will pull a relationship through when every other bond is on empty. You ever been in a season like that? Where it feels like all the other bonds, like I don't know if I can trust you, I don't know if something happened and my trust has been broken and I don't know if I can rely on you and we're certainly not touching each other and all this kind of stuff. And yet, I know at the end of the day, you're committed to me and I'm committed to you. When this happens, even as bad as this picture looks right here, as long as that's high, there's hope, right? There's a sense of we can get through anything because this one's high. And then vice versa, think about the other way. Even if every other bond is high and you don't know where this one stands, that breeds all sorts of insecurity, doesn't it? That brings with it all sorts of fear in a relationship. This is where if you have friends and you don't know how committed they are to you and you don't know where kind of it stands with a commitment, this is where you start to live with anxiety like, are they going to ditch me? Because you don't know where this one is. This is where, like with coworkers, you're like, are they cutting me out? Because you don't know where this one stands. This is when you're in a dating relationship, you're like, is he going to dump me? Is she going to dump me? I don't know where we stand on this. This is when in marriage, when this one feels low in a marriage, you're like, are we drifting apart? It's like it shakes the foundation of relationships when this one sinks, when that one begins to dip. When we question commitment in a relationship, that's when fear and insecurity set in. And on the other side, when commitment is unquestioned in a relationship, that's confidence. That's hope. That's a sense that we can get through this thing. And at the end of the day, one of the things we talked about, and I hope one of the things that's come out over the course of these last several weeks, is at the end of the day, you cannot control how much other people give you of these dials. You can't control what other people do with these dials. But you are responsible for your level of investment in each one of these dials. It's your choice. And you take responsibility, and I take responsibility for the way that I give myself to relationships when it comes to these core bonds. We only control the level of investment that we're willing to make. And so as we talk about commitment today, that's what I want to talk about, the level of investment we're willing to make when it comes to commitment and the choice we have to make to do that. Now, this is not really a new idea. In fact, the very first followers of Jesus, they thought about this a lot. And one of the conclusions that they came to was that following Jesus and reorienting your life around Jesus, it reshaped everything about our lives. And most particularly, it began to reshape the way we do relationships. That following Jesus changes how we approach relationships, changes the way we invest in these bonds with certain people. And as we begin to explore what it looks like to follow Jesus, they begin to come to this understanding that commitment is like this high value that we have to build into when it comes to relationships. In fact, there's this one passage. It's such an incredible passage. It was written by the Apostle Paul. He was writing it to the first followers of Jesus living in the city of Corinth. And even if you've never cracked open a Bible, even if you've never read the Bible, even if you're relatively new to church and you're new to the whole thing, my guess is you've probably heard this passage that we're going to look at here in just a second, because this passage is read at almost every single wedding. What's interesting, though, is that Paul didn't write this passage particularly about marriage. He didn't write it just about wedding days. He actually just wrote it about all human relationships, about the kinds of things that should be evident, particularly when it comes to commitment. And it starts out by this beautiful description of love. And again, not necessarily romantic love. It's bigger than that. I mean, it includes romantic love, but it's just human relationship, kind of how we should live with each other. And he starts by saying that love is patient. You want to develop strong relationships, patience. Love is kind. He says love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. He goes through this incredibly beautiful list. You should read it at some point. And then he ends this passage with almost like this crescendo. It's almost like this rapid fire, firework little statement about commitment. This is what he says. He says, love never gives up. That's commitment. Love never loses faith. That's commitment. Love is always hopeful. That's commitment. And love endures through every circumstance. It's like Paul saying, do you want to know what love is? You want to know what love looks like? It looks like commitment. It looks like how willing are you to invest this in the relationships with the people around you. It looks like commitment. And I think there's two huge implications of what Paul's saying here that we just need to camp out on for just a second. The first implication is this from Paul's words. It's that sometimes the most meaningful relationships in our lives require the most work. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships actually require the most work. And I don't know if that's news to you, but for some of you, my guess is it is news to you. And the reason I know that is because I talk to you. And I've heard some of you say things before to me, like about your marriage or about your relationships with your kids, whatever, and be like, man, should it really be this hard? Like if we loved each other and if things like, it shouldn't be this difficult, right? I'm like, who said that? Where did we pick up these ideas that the most meaningful relationships should just come easy? No, man, sometimes it means we dig in and we don't give up, and sometimes it means we don't lose faith, and sometimes it means we remain hopeful even when all the circumstances are working against us. Sometimes it means we endure. And I know for some of you, like, oh, that sounds so unromantic. I know that. They don't make movies about this kind of stuff. But the most important relationships in your life are not the ones that are going to make a movie about, are they? They're the boring ones, where this is happening over and over again. I think the second implication from Paul's words here, and this is huge, lean in on this one. You do not have to feel love in order to give it. That's a shocker. You don't have to feel love in order to give it. This is why whenever I talk to married people and they'll say things to me like, we've just fallen out of love, I'm always like, that's not possible. You can't fall out of love because love is a choice. Love is a decision. Love is an action. Love is a demonstration. Love is not, first and foremost, a feeling. What you mean to say is you've fallen out of like. You don't like your spouse anymore. You're in a season where you don't like them. I get that. But you don't have to like someone in order to love them. You don't have to like someone in order to choose to still love them. And let me just save you the suspense. If you're here today and you're dating and maybe one day you're thinking about being married or you're single and maybe you will be married one day, I'm just going to give you like spoiler alert right here, okay? Ready? When you get married, it is not a question of if, but rather it is a question of when you fall out of like with your spouse. Do you hear that nervous laughter around you? That's all the married people right now. And just because you fall out of like with your spouse, that does not mean you married the wrong person. It means you married a man. It means you married a woman. It means you married a human who brought all of their selfishness and baggage and junk into the relationship. And guess what? You did too. And you're trying to work this thing out together. It doesn't mean you married the wrong person. And here's what Paul knows. See, Paul knows what you know and what you've come to discover for your life. Paul knows a really simple question that kind of, that at some point we have to answer, and it's this. What do you have most control over in your life? Your feelings or your actions? And that's a rhetorical question. What do you have most control over, your feelings or your actions? Of course it's your actions. No one can tell you how to feel. You just feel them. You can't tell someone else how to feel. But you have total control over what you do. But so many of us, and here's where we get into trouble, so many of us base our level of investment with commitment in a relationship, we base it on feeling. How we feel at the present moment about something. And if we don't feel it, we drop it. I think part of the reason why is because there's a couple of different ways of seeing relationships. Particularly the relationships that are most intimate, the closest relationships to us. You can kind of sum it up like this. You can see there's a consumeristic, sort of a consumer way of seeing relationships, there's a covenant way, and I'll talk about this covenant one here in just a second. One way of looking at relationships is like a consumer. And I actually think this is the predominant way culturally we've been conditioned to view relationships. And it is exactly kind of what it says. A consumer is, you have something that I want, and I'm willing to pay a price for it. That might be my time in a relationship, my time, my energy, whatever it might be. I'm willing to pay a price for it. And as long as you give me the thing that I want, I'm willing to do that. But as soon as I don't get what I want, I back off. I pull out. I bail, whatever. I walk away. That's a consumer way of looking at it, especially when you don't get that 5-letter word. I don't know, I'm just not happy anymore. And we use that as our excuse to bail. And all of a sudden, that commitment level, whoop, gone. Because we're based on feelings. There's another way of seeing relationships, particularly the most intimate relationships in our life, and it's this word. And I know covenant's a really weird, Bible-y kind of word that we don't use a lot anymore, and yet it is so rich in meaning. The idea behind a covenant relationship is it's a relationship marked by an oath, by a promise that exists outside of feelings. Feelings are not the thing that determine whether or not you're committed to a covenant relationship because you've already made a promise to that relationship. That's what guides you. And you know what covenant relationships feel like. You know what covenant relationships are like because you've experienced them. And the way I know that you've experienced it is because every single one of you right now, you have a parent. And many of you have children. And when your child disrespects you or when your child talks back to you, you don't drive your child 90 miles out of the woods and leave them there. Why? No one had to tell you not to do that. No one had to train you not to do that. Why? Because you intuitively know that a parent-child relationship is a covenant relationship, not a consumer relationship. That your relationship with your child is not based on what they provide for you. It's based on something that goes way deeper than that. It's interesting because, in Jesus' day, in the first century, this consumer versus covenant relationship, it actually kind of gets brought to Jesus' attention, particularly when it comes to marriage. And there's this debate going on in the first century about what is a justifiable reason to divorce your wife. And it was never really the wives divorcing the husbands. It was always the husbands divorcing the wives. Pretty convenient for them. What's the justifiable reason to divorce your wife? And this gets brought up to Jesus. In other words, there was all sorts of writings and thoughts out there. In fact, you can go and you can look this up. I mean, there's writings that you could divorce your wife in the first century for burning your bread or burning your toast. If they didn't keep the house the way that you wanted them, that was justifiable grounds for divorcing them. And so it's all consumer. As soon as you don't provide for me, at what level can I say, hey, I'm not happy anymore. We're done. And this debate gets brought to Jesus. And they ask Jesus about this. And Jesus' response is so brilliant. And it is so challenging when it comes to, for any of us who want to work on this dial right here, on this lever of commitment. This is what Jesus says to them. He says, to religious leaders, by the way, this is such a smart aleck response. I love it. Jesus, haven't you read the scriptures? The religious leaders he's talking to. He's like, haven't you even read the Bible before? Let me tell you what it means. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is what? That's an important word right there. Joined to his wife. And the two are united into what? One. Jesus is like, whoa. Marriage is the most sacred. Marriage is the most intimate. Marriage is the most, intimate of all relationships. Marriage is about two people becoming one, being joined together. Two individuals coming together and being one. And Jesus in this statement elevates marriage to a covenant relationship that exists outside the boundaries of just feelings. Jesus says it is a covenant. It is exclusive. You are exclusively each other's. Legally, socially, economically, sexually. That is the vision that Jesus paints for marriage. So let me just kind of wrap up by just talking about romantic relationships for a moment. If you're here today and you're single and maybe one day, just please file this away. If you need to put it in a file drawer, file it away for one day when if you get into a romantic relationship. But if you're here and you're dating and you're married, I just want to talk about the implications of what Jesus is saying here, particularly when it comes to how we move and how we respond in our investment in this lever right here. I just want to talk to dating couples first. See, the truth is, a lot of us are dating right now, and we want all the perks and all the benefits of a covenant relationship without any of the commitment. We want all that, we just don't want to make a pledge. We don't want to make a promise. And I understand. I get it. I understand all the reasons for cohabitating, living together, and playing house without wanting to do this part. I got it. I've got friends who've done it. I've talked to many people who've been down that road. I understand. And I understand that some of you are sitting there going, yeah, but we need to know if we're compatible. We need to know if there's chemistry. We all know what that means. We need to know if there's chemistry. We need to know if there's compatibility. You know what's interesting? Studies that have been done between the sex lives of cohabitating couples and the sex lives of married couples, when they ask them how many times have you had sex on average in the last 2 weeks, they asked that to cohabitating couples, they asked that to married couples. It's a virtual tie. Marriage doesn't kill sex. And what's interesting to me is, you sit there and you're like, we need to know if we're compatible. We all know we're talking about this one right here, right? Compatible and there's chemistry. It's not rocket science. It's not complicated. It doesn't take too long before you figure out how to be good at it. That's weird that I just said that in church, but it's true. We're editing that out when we broadcast this. But it's true, and you know it. Here's another one. I know that because I've talked to people who are like, I don't know, though. I don't know if I'm ready to give up my freedom. Like, as soon as we do that piece, all of a sudden, like, all of our other options, all of the freedoms, like, are limited at that point. But here's the thing, guys. We constantly, day in and day out, we always limit certain freedoms in order to gain new freedoms, don't we? We do this all the time. We're not afraid of that. When you chose which university to go to, you limited your freedom to go to all the other universities that were on your radar. But because you limited that freedom and made a commitment to go to that university, you opened up a whole new set of freedoms. To get to know the people at that university, to make new friendships there, to find course loads that brought you to life. And you couldn't have experienced that without limiting your options. So we do this all the time. It's not a matter of limiting freedoms, it's a matter of which ones you want to limit. And when you choose to marry someone, and when you say, I'm going to commit to you at the highest level, I pledge myself to you, you are limiting your options, but you are experiencing and you are choosing a greater freedom. Freedom that comes from knowing that 10 years from now, 20, we will be together. And the safety and the security that comes with that. Guys, listen. I just feel like I need to tell you this, if this is you right here. If you're dating and you're living together and you want all the covenant stuff without any of the commitment stuff, because I need to tell you this because I'm not sure anybody else is going to tell you this. And I say this because I love you, but you just need to know this. Every ounce of research out there about living together, about cohabitation, this is not even Bible-y stuff, this is not even Jesus stuff, this is just research. Every ounce of research about cohabitation says that it has no benefit to any part of your relationship in the future or present. There's no benefit. In fact, every bit of research about cohabitation says it's actually damaging to a relationship. Why? Because this is a recipe for anxiety. This leaves the other person guessing. I don't even know where we stand on this one. And that is an insecure and vulnerable spot to be in. And relationships cannot thrive where there is not safety. When you don't know if the other person will be around a year from now, and yet you've given yourself fully to them. This leads to having to prove yourself. Every day is an audition to keep the relationship because there's no commitment. Guys, that's not the way it's supposed to be. I just care too much for you to let you believe otherwise. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And I get it because I know that some of you, and I've heard this one, because some of you are sitting there going, and you'll hear this, I don't need a piece of paper in order to say I love you. I don't need a piece of paper, like the marriage thing, and get it. I hear what Jesus is saying, all that, but I don't need a piece of paper in order to prove that I love you. And here's the thing, guys, that is an extraordinarily narrow view of love. Like that is a really shallow, narrow-minded way of looking at love. Because behind this, sort of the idea behind this is that love is measured by feeling. Love is measured ultimately by how desirous I am of you and how desirous you are of me. And of course, if that's what you mean by love, of course you don't need a piece of paper to prove that. You don't need a piece of paper to feel any of those things. But no one measures love that way. Like there's so much more meaningful way of measuring love. Love is ultimately measured in what someone is willing to sacrifice on your behalf and what you're willing to sacrifice on their behalf. Love is measured ultimately by the demonstration of what you're willing to give up for another person. Not just how you feel about them. And you know this is true because if I were to ask you today, who are the people who've loved you most in your life? The stories you would tell me would not be stories about people who just made you feel good or that you made feel good. You would tell me stories of people who sacrificed for you. You would tell me stories of people who committed to you. You would tell me stories about people who, in Paul's words, endured for you. That's love. Were you willing to commit at that level? And listen, guys, I'm going to lean in just a little bit harder. If you say to someone, I love you, but I just don't want to commit to you like this, what you are saying to them is, I love you, I just don't love you enough. I love you, I just don't love you enough to close off every other option. And I just want to tell you, you deserve better. I think that's what Jesus is saying. You're more valuable than that. You are worthy of a commitment. You are worthy of a commitment. And ladies, let me just speak to you. I know you don't need me to stand up for you, Jesus stands up for you. So let me just say something real quick. In the New Testament, when it talks about the relationship between a husband and a wife and what a woman deserves, Ephesians chapter 5 said that the husband who wants to follow Jesus and honor Jesus, you ought to be willing to lay down your life for your wife. Women, you are worthy of a man dying for you. You're worthy of that kind of love and commitment. Don't settle. Jesus is saying, man, you are so much more valuable. And I hope if you're here today and you're dating and you're playing house and you don't want to do this part, you just want all the benefits and the perks of a covenant relationship without any of the commitment, I hope this stirs you up. I hope your heart is stirred up in the best possible way. And I hope for some of you, you leave here today and you go, I love you too much to create insecurity. I love you too much to leave you guessing. So we got to fix this moving forward. Let's elevate this one. Let's talk about how we get this one up and drop the others for now so we get this one going. And married couples, let me just talk to you real quick about the implications, I think, of what Jesus is saying. I think it's so easy in our marriages. Once we do this, right? Once we move this to the highest level and we commit, I think it is so easy for that consumer mindset to creep back in, to fall out of like because all of a sudden we're not getting our needs met, because we're not happy, whatever, and we begin to withhold commitment based on that. It's so easy for that to happen, where we say, I'm not getting what I want, so I'm gonna question my commitment. And please understand me, I'm not talking about abuse. I'm not talking about neglect. I'm not talking about when there's an addiction in the home. And yes, you may need to question some of that when that's happening. There's no place for that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the things that 99.9% of married couples face. It's just when the other person, we've fallen out of like with them. My fear is for some of us, we begin to let that consumer mentality move back in. And we forget what we've committed ourselves to. And Jenny and I, we've been married 18 years, and one of the best, gifts that we got on our wedding day, other than that rooster plate. Why? I don't get it. The second best gift we got was a guy in our wedding party took our vows. We had written our own vows to each other, and he took our vows and he printed them out and he framed them for us. And for years, Jenny and I kept those framed vows in our bedroom. I saw them every day when I woke up. I saw them every night before I went to bed. And it served as a visible reminder of this. It doesn't matter if we've fallen out of like, that it doesn't matter. There's a covenant here that we've committed to. We kept those vows in front of us to get us through some of those seasons. And I just want you to know this. Again, this is just studies. You can go look this up. Longitudinal studies of relationships, particularly of marriages, longitudinal studies have shown that two-thirds of couples that described their marriage as unhappy 5 years later ended up saying that they were happy. Two-thirds. Do not quit on a bad day. Do not quit in a bad season, because you have no clue what's coming on the other side when you keep this at the forefront and you keep investing in your commitment level. And it's those vows ultimately that guide us here. It's the promise that we make, because when we vow, when we promise, when we pledge ourselves, we're saying, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what's coming. I don't know the ups and downs. I don't know this. But there's one thing I know for sure. You will be mine, and I will be yours. That's set in stone. So just ask yourself. Ask yourself a really simple question. Are there any relationships in your life right now that you need to up the commitment bar? Are there any relationships in your life right now that you need to up the level of commitment? And if so, let me just give you a few pointers real quick how to do it. Here's how to up commitment. It's kind of simple. Just say it. Not complicated. Just tell the person that you feel like we need to raise the commitment. Just tell them, I'm committed to you. Tell them, I'll be here for you. Tell them, I'm never leaving. Tell them the things that make them feel safe and secure. Just state your commitment to them. Here's a second way. Remind yourself. Part of the reason we kept our vows in our room is to remind, part of that was to remind me of what I've pledged myself to, what I've committed myself to. Remind yourself. Third way of upping commitment is set mutual goals together. There's something powerful that happens when, whether that's with friendships or dating relationships or marriages, doesn't matter. When you set a goal together, it forces you to work together, forces you in some ways to up your commitment level. When you're trying to get out of debt as a couple, you will grow more committed because you've set something out there you want to run towards. Might be for you the level of investment you need to make to up your commitment levels. You need to go to counseling. Jenny and I have had several seasons in our marriage where we had to go back to counseling. We had to go to counseling because of our marriage. And I just want to tell you, the reason why Jenny and I went to counseling to better our marriage wasn't because this was low. We went because this was so high. And we were committed to each other. So we're not going to, why would we let, just because these things are depleted, why would we let that keep us from talking about it? Because this is high. And I'm not trying to stereotype on this one. It's just my personal experience. Maybe you have a different experience. My personal experience is this. When I talk to couples, usually it's the wife having to drag the husband on this one. So men, let me talk to you for a second. Some of you know this. You know there are issues that are a little bit deeper than, just talking to friends about, and it's time to man up. And you may need to go to talk to someone for your children, for your marriage. Step up and do the brave thing because you've committed to something bigger than yourself. And the last one is just how to up the commitment is just make a public declaration. Go public with it. Let people know about your commitment. That might be for some of you, it's time to plan a wedding. It's time to say, I'm not going to keep you in suspense anymore. I want to publicly let people know I'm going to raise this up, and until we do, we're keeping these others down. You make a public declaration. And this isn't a one-time thing in relationships. You keep doing this again and again and again. And as you do, this elevates and relationships get richer. I've seen it happen. I've seen relationships, I've seen marriages that you thought were on the brink because this one stayed strong. Commitment pulled them through. And I just want you 5 years from now, if you would say you're unhappy right now, I just want to hear your story 5 years from now when you say, I am so grateful to God we didn't quit on a bad day. Matt and Karen have been a part of our church for years, and Matt actually is, he's on staff at our church. He's our campus pastor at our Lebanon location, and Matt and Karen have been here. I just love their story because everything we're talking about, I wanted you to hear a bit about how commitment has played at the forefront of their lives. So take a look at the screens.
We didn't work on knowing each other. We didn't work on trusting each other, or we didn't even know how to rely on each other. We only knew each other for 11 months before we got married. And then 3 years in, she came to me and she just said, I'm done.
I had felt very alone, very lonely, very just hopeless, like our marriage could never be what I had always wanted it or dreamed of being or feel connected to Matt.
The only thing I knew to do was to fight and fight for a marriage. And so I remember calling my uncle, who was hugely influential in my life, and especially through my teenage years. And I just remember sitting in his living room and crying. And as I got up to leave that night, he said, Matt, he said, I want you to do one more thing for me. He said, I want you to go home and I want you to write down 25 things you love about Karen. And I just kind of laughed at him. I'm like, why would I do that? She doesn't even want to be married to me right now. And he goes, it's for you to see, so put it somewhere that's just going to be a reminder for you to fight for your marriage. And so I did, and I stuck it in my Bible, and that's where I left it.
And while he was going through all that, I had talked to different friends and family members, and I thought, well, I'm just going to go be with a counselor for my last final, and then I was ready to walk out. This was a turning point for me. She just looked at me and she said, God wants me to tell you to trust him. He wants you to follow him. He wants you to obey the way that he intended things to be, and he wants you to trust him and see what he will do. That was not the answer I wanted. I turned around and walked out and I sobbed, and I was like, God, I can't see through this. I can't see how this would ever be what I needed, and I thought I knew what I needed. But I knew that day that I needed to go home and I needed to trust God. And I needed, even though I didn't see what was ahead and I didn't know that it would be okay, I didn't know. I just knew I had to take the next step. And so a couple weeks later, I was cleaning the house and knocked the list off that Matt had wrote of the 25 reasons why he loved me. And I just thought, if he could still love me and find ways to love me in spite of me ready to walk out and leave, I knew that this was going to be worth it.
I woke up that morning thinking, I'm done. I can't keep fighting. If she's not willing to fight, then I'm done. And at the time I was working with my brother. He said, Matt, don't you dare give up. You're almost there. And I didn't know what was happening to her because we weren't talking. And so I didn't know what the counselor had told her. I didn't know that she was about to find that list that had fallen out of my Bible. But it was those words that day that gave me the courage and the strength to come home and continue fighting for a marriage. I remember when I came home from work, the day you found the list and you showed it to me. And you asked me, you said, do you really feel this way about me? Yeah, the answer was yes. And it was then that we just
began our journey of working on our marriage and our life together.
We really committed to getting to know each other.
Good place to start.
Yeah. And relying on each other and rebuilding trust. And it has just been an incredible journey since.
I wish I could say that, like, the day after we decided we were going to work on things, that it got better, or even the week after, the month after. We didn't know what was ahead. We didn't know if our marriage would get better. We didn't know what we were going to face. We didn't even know if it was going to be okay and it would end in us staying together. It's taken a lot of work and a lot of commitment and a lot of just working on knowing each other, but it has been beautiful. We have 3 kids now that are family lives. We love our families. We love our kids. It's so fulfilling. And so we've had so much fun and memories. And when you go through and follow through with commitment, you have something with that person that you wouldn't have if you would have walked away. I wish more people could see what was on the other side of a marriage if they would just stick with it. Most of the time we know what's going to happen if we walk out of it. We know what we won't have to deal with. But if we would just stick through it and keep going, we were able to follow God and stay committed and stay married, and we see that He is so good and He has blessed us so much.
I can't imagine how different our lives would be and what we would have missed out on had we not committed to, in some ways, starting over and starting fresh and doing it the right way, even 3 years into our marriage.
Commitment. Commitment is the bond that will pull a relationship through when every other bond is depleted. My guess is some of you are here today and you are in the battle of your life for your relationship. And I just don't want you to lose hope. I want you to know that there is hope. That when you put Christ at the center of your marriage, when you put Christ at the center of your relationship, and you don't put your eyes on the other person, you put your eyes on Jesus, you see a Savior who stayed on the cross because He was committed to you. You follow a Savior who does not give up, but chooses love again and again. And as you follow that Savior, your Savior, Jesus Christ, will give you all the strength you need to live committed. And I realize that some of you are here today and you feel that and you're compelled by that, but you're in a relationship with someone, they're not there. They don't want what you want. They're not committed. And to you, I would just encourage you. And I would say, at the end of the day, you are responsible for you and you alone. You are responsible to God for your actions and yours alone. So stay faithful, even in the midst of unfaithfulness to the relationship. And then for some of you, I realize some of you are here and it's too late. The divorce happened. The relationship was severed. Things have been broken. And to you, I would just remind you that today is a new day. And grace and mercy rule this day. And although you cannot change the past, you can be changed as you step into the future. And the power of God works in your life to strengthen your willingness to commit to the people closest to you. So move forward in confidence. Evaluate your relationships with the people closest to you and ask, are there any that need you to invest moving that lever of commitment up right now? And if so, be courageous. Step out and commit. You'll be glad you did. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week for week 5 of Winning at Relationships.